Welcome into another edition of the 5 Reasons Podcast. My name is Chris Whittingham, joined as always by Ethan Skolna. You can find everything we're doing in the 5 Reasons Sports Network, including episodes of this podcast, where you can find it on your preferred podcast provider at 5reasonsports.com. You can find all the other podcasts in our network. Today, though, we are highlighting 2 podcasts because it is NFL Draft Week. We very much recommend The Fish Tank this week, an incredible episode with Stu Weinstein, the former head of security for the Miami Dolphins, talking about an aspect of the draft I had never considered, the aspect of doing background research on all these players. Stu Weinstein describing how he would do background checks on 600 draft prospects and 300 unrestricted free agents for the Dolphins to have reports and thoughts on all of them. It was great stuff. Check it out, The Fish Tank with Seth Levitt and O.J. McDuffie, and of course, 3 yards per carry, Simon Clancy, Alfredo Arteaga, and of course, our guest today, Chris Kouffman, who's come to join us to preview the draft. They are as big of draft nerds as anyone that I know, and that is why we have them on this time of year, so we can really dig into what's going on with the Miami Dolphins, who are picking at 13 this year. But we're not going to start there, and CK, we very much appreciate you doing this. We want to start with Josh Rosen. So Arizona, and I was listening to Adam. I'm cramming right now on the draft. I haven't really been in on the whole process, so I've been cramming. And I was listening to Adam Schefter's podcast today with Mel Kiper and Todd McShay, and he was talking about that. He sounded very confident, in without explicitly saying it, that Kyler Murray is going number 1 to the Arizona Cardinals. So Josh Rosen is available. If you're the Dolphins, CK, what is your price if you are going after Josh Rosen, and do you even like the idea to begin with?
I don't much like the idea to begin with, but that doesn't mean that there couldn't be a price. I just think a 3rd-round pick, which is what people are talking about, might be a little bit rich for my blood. I know that sounds crazy because he was just a top 10 pick 1 year ago, and everybody likes to talk about his time with the Cardinals and say, well, listen, it was a bad team. All forgiven. He was a rookie. I get that. But I also, sort of the risk manager in me worries about catching a falling knife on a guy like him. And there's not much history to those kinds of trades of quarterbacks that were taken kind of high and then had some challenges ending up working out well. For me, Josh Rosen, the problem goes back. Well, first off, I admit I had him as a 1st-round pick a year ago. So I'm sort of changing my mind 1 year later on him already. And the reason that I am is because it goes back a little bit further than just the 1 year in Arizona. I think if you look back at his entire career at UCLA, there was a constant stream of underachievement there, and we overlooked it coming out of the draft because of their traits and their skills, their core skills that he had,
and even hype, and so really, because
we settled on we focused on all that stuff and said, okay, well, maybe things just didn't go so well at UCLA. But then you fast forward another year, and it's another year of underachievement. It's another year of poor play. It's another year of him being surrounded by maybe a bad team, but also kind of maybe him making them worse. At this point, you're just like, well, maybe I'd like to lay off. But that said, if we're talking about a conditional future pick, and as opposed to I'm staring in the 3rd round and I see someone, we'll talk about draft prospects later, but let's say I'm staring at somebody like, like Chuma Edoga, the offensive tackle from USC, or Jelani Tavai, the linebacker from Hawaii, or Christian Miller from Alabama, who's a really great pass rusher. I'm staring somebody in the face right there, and I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to take one of those guys. I'm going to go ahead and give it up for Josh Rosen. When the upside just seems really limited to me, then I don't think I'd do that. I think, maybe future conditional pick, something along those lines.
See, here's where I come down on this, and I don't typically disagree with CK on very much, particularly from a Dolphins perspective. But when we talk about the value of a pick, I have to put this in the context of what the Dolphins have done with previous 3rd-round picks. And I know that I shouldn't do that because I know that 3rd-round picks are currency, whether or not you use them or you trade them. But the lack of success that they've had over the years, and look, Chris Greer is still there. I'm not blaming him for everything that's happened before, but he's still part of this process. And my big issue, and Chris Whittingham knows this because I've beat on this on every single Dolphins podcast we ever do, is that they have not set aside enough resources for the quarterback position over the past 20 years. Actually, going back further, because they didn't even prepare for Marino. I mean, and when I say they, I mean, we're talking about like 12 different regimes, but it's just been a consistent pattern when you're talking about, they've only drafted 2 quarterbacks in the first round since, Marino in 1984, right? I mean, that's it. And so, my thing on this is that you keep taking quarterbacks until you find the right one. And I know that there's a prevailing theory here that you don't want to get too good. So there's a concern. Okay, what if Josh Rosen turns out to be too good? I know you tweeted that at me today, and then you win 5 or 6 or 7 games and you take yourself out of the running for Tua, and then you don't set yourself maybe the next year for Lawrence or whatever is going to happen there. But I just don't think you can operate like that. Like, that's been my issue with this whole tanking premise the whole offseason is, like, yeah, I know what they're trying to do, but, like, I don't even know if they're going to be successful at that. They've never been successful at anything. So how are they going to be successful at that? And it's like,
I wrote an article to that effect, by the way.
You did, and I just don't on 5reasonsports.com. And I just don't know if you can do everything scared. And I feel like not bringing in a guy because he might turn out to be decent and he might win you too many games. I mean, that was the same premise with Fitzpatrick. And you have to field like a team that like a few people are going to go out to see, right? And so what's the worst case? Like, okay, so you give up a 3rd round pick for Josh Rosen. So that's currency that you've given up. Okay, maybe you would have done something good with it. Maybe you would have packaged it for something else. Maybe you wouldn't have done something good with it. But let's say Josh Rosen comes here and he's bad. Okay, he's terrible. Well, then you move further up in the draft next year. That's fine. Let's say he's pretty good. What's the worst case scenario from having a guy who may not be the guy, but maybe a guy before you get the guy? And that way, if you don't get Tua the next year, maybe you don't have to reach on another quarterback. I mean, Herbert, let's say who it is. And maybe you say, okay, we can wait for Lawrence next year. And what if Rosen is just good enough to be a high-level backup? Like, Philadelphia did pretty good with a high-level backup. They won a Super Bowl with a high-level backup. The Giants, going way back to Parcells' years, won a Super Bowl with a high-level backup. I just think, the 49ers had a pretty damn high-level backup when Montana was there. I don't think, to me, you can never sort of put aside enough resources for the quarterback position. Now, if we want to have a discussion about Rosen as a player, I know you've cooled on him a little bit. That's, to me, a different conversation. But as far as giving up a 3rd rounder for a quarterback who was a 1st-round pick last year, who didn't have an awful season. He wasn't good, but they were terrible, too.
I would disagree with that. It was a pretty awful season.
Okay, well, I think that's a debate we should have. Absolutely. Yeah. But I just think, in general, the quarterback position to me is too important to worry about. I mean, if they're going to end up taking a guard in the 3rd round, like, okay, I mean, maybe they get a free agent guard a year later. I mean, I just, to me, the position is too important to keep putting it off. And I feel like the Dolphins have done that for 20 years. They found excuses not to take guys, and that's where they are. That's why they are where they are now.
So I want to tackle this from one perspective, CK, and that is, to me, the key word that you said is upside. That Josh Rosen doesn't really have enough upside to justify this investment. That if the idea is finding your franchise quarterback, that you want to have a quarterback that obviously has that upside to be at the very highest level. Are you ruling out after year 1 that he could be that quarterback at the highest level? And as a follow-up, do you think that if they decided to maybe use that 3rd-round pick on a quarterback that is available in this draft, that there could be someone that they could take as a rookie rather than as a second-year player with that 3rd-round pick or even a second-round pick that you think that could potentially have that level of ceiling that is above what Josh Rosen is right now?
In this draft, I really only have probably one guy that you could take around that area that I feel like could have that sort of upside. But what I would say about it, first off, on a general level with this sort of trade, the problem with it is one of 2 things: commitment and signaling. When you get a player, okay, these players, it's not like asking a dealer for new cards to where you flip them over and now you know what you have magically. Okay, the player has to signal to you what he is. I mean, offensive line guru Tony Sperano in 2008 had Evan Mathis signed for a penny contract, and he was there for a few months, and they waived him. They cut him. They didn't think he was worth anything. He didn't signal to them that he was worth anything. He went on to be a multiple All-Pro and probably the best guard in football for 6-7 years running with Cincinnati and Philadelphia. So it's about signaling. You're not giving Josh Rosen a commitment when you flip a 3rd-round pick for him and say, yeah, okay, maybe you can play this year or something like that. The question is, how good does he have to be this year in 2019 in order for you to say, you know what? I think we might have a franchise guy here. I'm going to beg off on this 2020 class, and I'm not going to go and replace him. I'm going this. We did it. We hit the lotto. We hit the Josh Rosen lotto. Like, how good, where is that standard? How high, how bright does he need to shine in order to do it? Now you have to take a look. Okay, now how likely is he to actually do that? Because he was already on a bad team, right? He was already on a bad team in Arizona, and he failed with them. He failed badly with them. He had the lowest QBR since anybody's had since Blake Bortles was a rookie. Okay, that was how bad he was. And people talk about the offensive line and say, well, it's all the offensive line's fault. They were really bad. But you know what? On 60% of the plays, he was not pressured. He had the lowest passer rating in the NFL on not pressured plays. So it wasn't the offensive line there, right? Yes, I understand it was a rookie. I understand there was other things going on. But he comes to Miami where things aren't much better. I mean, everybody thinks that Miami sucks, right? Everybody thinks that they have the worst roster in the league. Everybody thinks that, Las Vegas has them with the lowest win total, and so on and so forth. So how likely is it that Josh Rosen goes from sucking on a sucky team last year to coming to Miami this year and blowing us away and us saying, wow, we did it. We found the franchise quarterback. Because otherwise, let me describe another worst case scenario to you, Ethan. You said, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario to me is that he comes here, say he does improve, within reason. He improves to say, like a 90 passer rating or something like that, which, by the way, is NFL average nowadays. So let's say he does get to like an 88, 90 passer rating. They win some games. They get further away from Tua Tagovailoa and whoever ends up being, the top quarterbacks in that class. And let's say, because of that success, Miami says, you know what? Maybe we will. We're not going to force the draft, right? That's what it all comes down to. They say they're not going to force the draft. They're not going to package everything, mortgage the future, trade up and get this quarterback and do all this thing. No, we'll let the draft play out to us, and then they don't get a quarterback, and then we have what we have in effect is an unfortunate extension of Ryan Tannehill's career in Miami. And that's what the real worst case scenario is with Josh Rosen. It's a matter of commitment. You're not actually committing to Josh Rosen the way that a team does with a top 10 quarterback. And so because you're not committing to them, they have to meet a really high standard for you to say, well, I'm going to keep on going with him. I think he's successful. And how likely is it that he's actually going to meet that standard on this bad team when he's already sucked on a bad team? That's the question. I don't think there's a very high chance at all that he does that he meets that standard, that he shines that brightly with Miami. And certainly don't think there's a high enough chance to justify a third-round pick on it. And that's why I won't do it. It comes down to the third-round pick and this player and saying, you know what? I'm going to beg off. It's not that I'm against taking a chance on a quarterback altogether. I've been talking up Easton Stickham, North Dakota State for a long time, and he's a guy that I would feel comfortable in the mid rounds with. It's just that this particular opportunity doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
No, and I get all that. I'm just evaluating it as if Josh Rosen was coming out in this draft, right? Where would you have him? Would you have? Because I think sometimes what happens is the more we see a player, sort of the less we like him.
Right, and I mean, it's a used car, right? It's a car that
right.
that has depreciated by being driven off the lot.
Right, so he's been driven off the lot and into a ditch, right? Like, I mean, that's basically what's happening.
Well, that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I guess... So I guess what we're saying is that to you, and look, I understand where you're coming from on it, but to you, the unknown, and it's not totally unknown because you've done the tape research on this, but like the unknown of what another guy is going to do in the pros is better to you than the known of what we saw Josh Rosen do. And I guess my question is, if Josh Rosen was coming out right now, not knowing what he did in Arizona last year, in this class, where do you think he would get drafted? If he was coming off his what was he played 4 seasons at UCLA, right? So if he was coming off his senior season at UCLA, where would he get drafted? He would be behind. I'm assuming he'd be behind Murray. He'd be behind Haskins, probably, right? Would he be behind Locke? Would he be behind Jones? Would he be behind? Where would he be ahead of Stick, right? Like, where would he fit? Would he be higher than third round, do you think?
The problem here is I disagree with the very premise, like you have to ignore what just happened this year. You can't. The evaluation is ongoing. The evaluation never stops with these players. Okay, it doesn't. It's not as if you evaluate a player, you cut it, it's done, and now he is what he is at the moment of that evaluation, and now he has to disprove it. The evaluation is always ongoing, so you can't just take things that happen and pretend that they didn't happen. You have to keep evaluating. I think within that context of the fact that he went and threw more passes, went and disappointed again, which he already had done several times, several years in UCLA. I think within that context, if you know all of that, well, hell, the NFL are supposedly only valuing him as a third round pick right now. So that's sort of your answer. Where would he rate in this class? Well, the NFL aren't willing to trade more than a third round pick for him, apparently. And that might not even be true, because all of this might be sort of being put out there by the Arizona Cardinals, who want to drum up some trade interest. You never know until it happens. So I think that, the NFL are sort of answering that for you, where he would rate in this draft, because you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't pretend that last year didn't happen. You can't pretend that he didn't show you more and give you more information. What you had, this is part of, we call it in finance economics, we call it Bayesian updating. You can't stop doing that.
Wait, do that again? What was that? and you're the only person in the network who would have said that.
I love
so
this.
give that to me. You're not going to get that on Miami Heat beat. Not even from the Cayas.
We call it in finance and econ, we call it Bayesian updating. It's updating your previous views with new information. Basically, you have in game theory and such, you have at any given point you have expected values and probabilities of outcomes, and then afterwards you have new information, and then you go and recalculate those probabilities using the new information. That has to be going on. That's human nature. You have to keep evaluating, and you have to keep looking at things with the new information that you have. You can't get stuck on something that you thought a year ago and then never update it. And that's where I think I am on Josh Rosen. It's not that I don't want to get quarterback assets. I really do. And it's not that I'm afraid of winning in 2019 either. All things being equal, I kind of like winning, I don't think it's such a sin. I think they've clearly given up on 2019, and I think that there are advantages. If you've given up on a year like that, which we can talk about later, with respect to the 13th overall pick. But yeah, I think this particular player, I was high on him a year ago, or at least high enough to say, yeah, I'd take a flyer on him in the first round. I tend to be easy to give up, because I'm like you, Ethan. I think you need to be trying, or else what are you doing, right? At that position, and I get that. So I've given first round, or I've said I'll toss a first round pick on guys before that end up being horrible, yeah. Right?
Mine was Ryan Mallett. I was willing to throw that pick away for Ryan Mallett.
I was driving that train, man. So I think that over time there have been a lot of QB1s that I've had that I'd say that's not just somebody I take a flyer on. That's somebody I take with a number 1 overall pick. That's like a really special quarterback. And I have a good list of those. Not all of them were great. Josh Rosen was certainly not there. He was that was reserved for Baker Mayfield for me. But I would have taken a flyer on him in the first round. And now I'm saying, like, a year later, I'm like, you know what? Because here's the bottom. If you look over NFL, and this is the last point that I'll make, because we need to move on, I'm sure. The last point that I'll make, if you look at the last, say, 20 years of NFL history, and guys that were taken this high in the first round, and the ones that were successful, that you'd look at and say, you know what? He had a good career. That was a successful quarterback. Of the ones that ended up having to play as rookies, probably about 80% of them, or maybe even 90% of them, actually showed you good things as a rookie, like played well. It might surprise people to know that, but it's true. Like most of these guys actually played. Russell Wilson played well as a rookie. Ben Roethlisberger played really well as a rookie. Peyton Manning set rookie records for completions and yards and attempts and touchdowns. And yeah, he had his first 4 games where he just threw interceptions like mad, like his first 4 games of the season. But the last 12 games of the season, he was freaking awesome, for a rookie. Everybody took notice. And there were a lot of these guys that actually showed something as rookies. If you thought Josh Rosen had like a 40% chance of being the guy you want him to be coming out of the draft at number 10 overall, and that, 8, 9 out of 10 of these guys that are successful showed you something as a rookie, and Josh Rosen's not one of those. Now, what do you think his percentage is? That's what I mean about, updating. And that's kind of what, his percentage now is consistent with about a 3rd, 4th round pick. And that's why he's being valued there by the NFL, I think. I'm just saying that I personally, would beg off.
We'll get back to today's episode in a second, but first I want to tell you about one of our new sponsors here in the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is the attorneys at Seltzer Mayberg. Find them at onecalllegal.com. That's O-N-E, calllegal.com, or actually call 855-5000-LAW LAW. They handle cases including but not limited to car accidents, slip and falls, and any personal injury matters. Additionally, if you mention 5 Reasons, they will handle your traffic ticket for $44.99 with a new 15,000 square foot office opening on I-95 in North Miami. They will handle cases all over South Florida. Call now with 24/7 service for a free consultation. onecalllegal.com or 855-5000-LAW. The attorneys at Seltzer Mayberg, a proud sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Now, and my sort of viewpoint on this is, I liked Josh Rosen in college, but again, I think it was for the hype and the trait reasons than it is for anything that he actually did in college. And then the other thing, too, that I wanted to have a counterfactual for, but really the only one I can come up with is Drew Brees, is there just aren't a lot of examples of a quarterback that just needed a situation change. I think we see this in basketball a lot, where sometimes all a guy needs is a situation change to turn around his career. Victor Oladipo needed 2, and he's become a star for the Indiana Pacers. But that is more common in basketball than it is in the NFL, where good quarterbacks are good quarterbacks from the team that they are drafted into, and very rarely do you see a quarterback change teams, and you see, clearly it just needed that scenery change for it to totally turn around his career. So I think that those lack of examples kind of get me off of this. And I think in the end, what's going to happen here is Washington's going to be one that's going to do this trade, because I think they're more desperate to have a quarterback for this year and are more desperate to have a go at this than the Dolphins are. And so I think they're going to be willing up to give up a better asset, either the 15th pick or their second round pick, in order to pull this off. So that would be my thought on this. And I do indeed want to move on, as you said, CK, to the Dolphins picking at 13. We can't imagine, even if the Dolphins do select there, that pick at all gets affected with a Josh Rosen dealing. So I want to start first with the guy in this draft, looking at 13, that you would most want, that you think is the most feasible to end up at 13 for the Dolphins.
The most feasible probably is Jeffrey Simmons of Mississippi State. If I had, my dream, and I don't know if I'd really use that sort of strong terminology, but, fantasy would be Ed Oliver making it down to that pick. Ed Oliver of Houston, defensive tackle. I don't think he's going to. I really have not thought that there's much possibility of him making it down there. I think he's just too good. He's gonna go too high. There's a short list. There's a short list of guys I'd be okay with, but Jeffrey Simmons kind of feels like a guy that I'd be a little bit more than just okay with and actually excited about. And I mentioned before that there's a reason that you decide as a team that you're not going to care about winning in a particular year. And I don't necessarily think it's to try and tank and get the number 1 overall pick. I think it's because that affords you the ability to look at the draft in a different way than other teams do. Other teams have to value the winning in 2019. So when they're looking at a guy like Jeffrey Simmons who can't play in 2019, then even though they know that from 2020 to 2021, 2022, he's going to be better than all but maybe 4 or 5 other players in the draft, it doesn't matter, because he's not going to give them anything in 2019, and they have to value that. But the Miami Dolphins have decided, you know what, we're not going to win in 2019 anyway, so we're going to set that to 0. We don't value it. We don't value 2019. We actually are looking at all these guys as if they're going to be on 3-year contracts. And so if that's the case, they get to value a guy like Jeffrey Simmons. a little bit more than the rest of the league does.
Can you explain for the audience what Jeffrey Simmons is as a prospect and why that would be the case?
Sure. Jeffrey Simmons is a defensive tackle from Mississippi State. He would be probably, I know at least one team, one personnel executive thinks he's the best player in the draft. Michael Lombardi is a former general manager, and whose son also works for the Miami Dolphins and has worked in New England, has worked for several other people. He thinks he's the best player in the draft. Todd McShay has talked about him as being a top 5 player in the draft if he were healthy. He has a torn ACL. And he also has some history back in high school that, I won't sugarcoat. It's bad. But there are a specific incident, I would say.
Just to explain, there's video of him punching a woman in defense of his mother. That's the incident in a sentence. There's obviously more context, but that is the incident in a sentence.
Right, and it's from 2016. He was a high school recruit at the time. He ended up being charged with a crime, and he ended up settling with the woman and moving on. Every indication we have, and Simon has done a whole lot of research on Jeffrey Simmons, is he's been an absolute model citizen. I forget what his GPA is at Mississippi State, but it's really high. He's been a model player and citizen. But there's that video. It's ugly, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to excuse it. It is what it is. Everybody's going to have to decide whether they're comfortable with it. But the ACL is a totally separate issue, right? He tore his ACL, I believe, in February of this year, training for the draft. So he's not going to be able to play in 2019. And that's what I'm getting at with this 2019 value thing. He's a defensive tackle. He's super strong, explosive, very, very heavy-handed. I think he plays a lot like Lawrence Guy of New England, and so there's a natural analog for how he would fit in this defense. I also think when I watch him play, I'm like, he's got things going that I haven't felt like I've seen probably since Ndamukong Suh in exactly that way when he was at Nebraska. Aaron Donald was he was a dominant force. I loved him. I thought he was one of the best players in that draft, but he was a different kind of player than Ndamukong Suh. I think Jeffrey Simmons is a little bit more like that Ndamukong Suh. Very heavy-handed for a defense and a bunch of coaches on the staff that say they're looking for heavy-handed players now. That's their change. That's their preference. So I think he fits perfectly for Miami. I think that he fits with the shtick that they have where they're not going to care about 2019. He would make a really good pick for them at 13 overall. You could actually feel like, hey, we wouldn't normally get a player of this caliber at 13 overall. We're getting him because of this, tanking thing in 2019.
It would feel a little to me like the Laramie Tunsil thing. I mean, different reason, right? But Tunsil slipped, wasn't supposed to be there, was supposed to be top 3, maybe even first. And then that situation with the video that came out, and he drops to them, and obviously he's a really good player. Before we get into more players here, I just sort of have a theoretical question for you. So, I'm down with this, okay, with waiting a year for a guy. I feel like, again, if you're not winning a championship this year, then, as long as the fans are patient with it, it's okay. My question that always comes up, though, is how the other players in the locker room react to it. They still have some veterans on this team, right? I know that they're not necessarily planning on keeping all of them, but, you still have Rashad Jones is still here. Xavier Howard is still here, wants an extension. Laramie Tunsil wants an extension. Bobby McCain. Kenny Stills. There's enough vets on this team. Kenyon Drake's a young vet. Is there any concern for you, sort of the long-term damage that it does when an organization basically says, not only are we sort of not trying to win and we're leaking that out to everybody that we're looking for a quarterback in 2020, but also, we're going to take a guy who can't even play for us this year, maybe. How do you think that plays?
I think that they'd have to explain that this was a top 5 pick that fell in our laps because of this injury. Other teams have done it. Certainly the Dallas Cowboys. That's what it's all about talking points, right? So the Dallas Cowboys did it with I believe Jalen Smith is I forget his last name.
Yeah.
But Jalen Smith, they did it with him. Once upon a time, the Buffalo Bills did it with Willis McGahee. You just have to explain that this is a very good elite level player that wouldn't have fallen in our laps unless there was this situation. Does the locker room get disheartened by it? I don't know. Do they get disheartened by the fact that their quarterback is Ryan Fitzpatrick, and not somebody else? Maybe. It's hard to know. It's up for the coaches to determine how they need to proceed with the players to keep them locked in, and whether you can basically just make them afraid of their jobs and their NFL future enough that they stay locked in for you. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think that if I were the Dolphins, I kind of have a thought in my head of how I would handle it, but I don't know if it would work.
We'll get back to our episode here in a second, but first I want to tell you about a great new sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is ShipYourCarNow.com. These guys can move any car, boat, RV, motorcycle, or equipment anywhere you need worldwide. You have a business and need to ship freight or machinery? Call them. College moves, new car, used car, buying the toy you've looked at for a while? Call them. These guys can ship it all, so give them a call. Here's the number, 1-800-264-4644. That's 1-800-264-4644, or visit shipyourcarnow.com/5 reasons. Also, make sure to mention 5 reasons on the phone. I wish they'd had this when I was going to college. This would have been great for me. I needed to get my car down from Baltimore to Florida. I ended up taking the auto train. You don't want to take the auto train. Ship your car, fly. No job too big or too small. Ship Your Car Now moves it all.
The Dolphins in the last few years, I feel like, have kind of had their selection made for them by the way that the draft kind of played out. Last year was Minkah Fitzpatrick falling to them, and it just seemed like the most obvious thing to do. You thought he was a top 10 player. He ends up at 13, and you end up selecting him. Even Devontae Parker felt like wait, hold on. We're getting Devontae Parker in the mid-teens? That doesn't feel like that should happen. Laramie Tunsil, the same thing. So I feel like, other than the Charles Harris pick, which is obviously later on in the first round, these picks have kind of been made for the Dolphins. So would you anticipate, CK, a scenario like that happening, whether it is, you mentioned Ed Oliver, I'm seeing him in mock drafts going as high as 4. Is there a player that you think that could be considered elite by others, but maybe because there's a run on quarterbacks, maybe Denver takes Drew Lock, maybe the Giants take Dwayne Haskins, maybe there's 3 quarterbacks in the top 12, and so whoever maybe the 10th best player in the draft is that shouldn't be there at 13 is going to be there by virtue of there being a run on quarterbacks.
Don't see it in this one, but hey, who saw Laramie Tunsil? I mean, nobody was going to. I did think that there was a fair chance Minkah Fitzpatrick was going to be available before. I still would have taken Derwin James. That was my personal opinion. But yeah, I think that it could happen, but it would be totally, I mean, as you've implied, it would be totally unexpected. It would be, I don't even know if there's any use speculating on it because, as of right now, there's no way to see Ed Oliver or Quinnen Williams or Nick Bosa or Josh Allen making it down to that pick. And so, I don't see speculating on it right now. And those are sort of the players that you're looking at, I think. I think Jawan Taylor, the Florida tackle, he's a right tackle. I think he is the best tackle in the draft. I think the best left tackle in the draft specifically is Andre Dillard of Washington State. And he's going to get pushed up because he's a left tackle. But Jawan Taylor is actually the best tackle, period. He reminds me a lot of Laramie Tunsil. He would give me pause, certainly, if he were available at that pick, at that 13 overall pick, even looking at him next to a Jeffrey Simmons or something like that. But otherwise, I don't see it. I think that most likely they're going to try to trade down. I mean, that's got to have been on their mind for over a year now, since Stephen Ross kind of floated that to them last year, and then they refused, and supposedly Chris Greer refused, but we know that Steve Ross actually floated it, and we know that he was unhappy after the draft. I can't speculate on what exactly the dialogue was, but yeah, so I think that had to be on their mind for a year, and they're going to try it. It's just, that doesn't manifest just because you want it to. I think there are a lot of teams that want to trade down, and probably only a few that want to trade up, or maybe only one, maybe only the Houston Texans. And so they're going to be talking to all these teams that want to trade down, and they're going to look for them to sort of bid against each other and get that price down. And does the price end up making sense for Miami? I don't know. It's anybody's guess.
I saw that Laramie Tunsil, I guess he was with Chris Sims, and made it very clear he wanted Jawan Taylor to play right tackle for the Dolphins.
Yeah, he's a fantastic player.
And we're going to need someone to protect Tua's blind side. So
Right. Well, that's true. Actually, I didn't even consider
right,
that. But,
right tackle is more important than left tackle for the next 10 years for the Dolphins.
Well, it is. And CK, I want to run this by you because I think you are in agreement with me on this also about and this has been something that's been out there for 15, 20 years, but I feel like everybody says it now about there are 4 premium positions, right? Like Jimmy Johnson used to say this over and over. It's quarterback, it's left tackle, it's corner, and it's pass rushing defensive end, basically. And so, the Dolphins seem pretty set at 2 of those spots, provided that they give extensions to those 2 guys. They have really nothing at the other 2 at all. I mean, they don't even have AAF, level talent, in some spots.
Hey, they did sign J-Ron Elliott.
Well, they did. Yeah, actually, they do have AAF level talent.
They have AAF. That is what they have. They have AAF level talent.
Right. So at quarterback and at defensive end. But I would just ask this because you're talking about players, who maybe, are more interior players and such. Mm-hmm. I mean, does that matter to you? I mean, are you the type that would say, okay, we've got to address those 2 spots, whether it's, quarterback we've talked about, but I mean, to me, if I was to say, if I could take a player at one position in this draft, I would say I'd want a pass rusher because they don't have anything resembling one other than, like you said, the one kid they picked up from AF, and he's not that much of a kid anymore. Right? I mean,
no, you're right.
They don't have anything. I mean, they whiffed on Charles Harris. I think that's pretty clear at this stage.
I'm almost signed out or checked out on him on Charles Harris personally. But to be fair, at this stage of Olivier Vernon's career, his pass rush numbers looked similar as far as the pressure rates and stuff go. And then obviously he took a next step, but I think he was also more of a well-rounded player than Harris has shown himself to be thus far. You're right. They don't have a pass rusher. It looks like I used a very unkind term when I was talking to Simon and Alf about that position. And I said that they have refried ass at defensive end right now. But they, that's what it looks like. But what I'll say is, and I hate to fall for this. Like, I feel like I'm almost eating the cheese, but if you look at the Patriots and look at what they've done throughout the years, they haven't placed a ton of priority, a ton of resources in outside pass rushers over the years. And they didn't re-sign Trey Flowers when he came up for extension. When Chandler Jones, they did spend a late first round pick on Chandler Jones, but then they traded him off before they'd have to pay him a lot of money. I think that the system in New England specifically is getting pass rush situationally and by blitzing and I hate to just put it all on scheme, but that's what they do. I think they value some other things much more. I think they value their defensive backs more. I think they value those interior and big boy and line players more. And I think that they value the versatile linebackers like Donta Hightower and Kyle Van Noy, and even going back, look at other guys that have played there on the outside. I think even going back to Tully Mantakane, they value those versatile linebackers that can actually go to the outside and pass rush and be speedy pass rushers. Maybe that's not important in this system. Maybe that's the decision. I don't know. Maybe that they're going to say, hey, we would like to get some players there, and they're going to spend like maybe a second, third round pick on it or something like that. But maybe it's not first round, number 13 overall priority. I don't know. It would make a little sense to me. I do know this. The biggest transition this defense is making from Matt Burke to Brian Flores is in the secondary. And I've said that from the start because Matt Burke overused base defense with only 4 defensive backs on the field. He overused it and then never put dime defense on the field with 6 defensive backs, certainly never quarter with 7. So, that was Matt Burke's defense, underusing defensive backs. Brian Flores in New England have been the complete opposite of that. Okay. So they hardly ever use base with only 4 defensive backs, hardly ever. And they use dime or quarter, 6 or 7 defensive backs on the field at the same time, nearly half the time. And if you look at Miami's secondary talent and say, how are we going to staff that? How are we going to fill those positions? How are we going to get, we're going to have a lot of defensive backs on the field and they're not very good. Like, that's the biggest transition they need a lot more secondary talent. That's why Alfredo on our podcast has been predicting Greedy Williams for a long time. It makes a lot of sense. They are a man coverage team. They're possibly the most man coverage oriented team or defense in the league. And Greedy Williams is a man coverage specialist. So that would make a lot of sense. I always tell people, that's the biggest transition. Don't look at the outside pass rusher and say that's how we need to transition to this new defense. I think the defensive backfield is a lot more important.
All right, CK, I want to get to your area of expertise, which is NFL draft dorkitude. You are a level of researcher that I cannot possibly fathom. You know things about prospects that I have not heard of and will not have heard of by even the end of the draft process. So you spend a lot of time on this, so I just want you for the next few minutes to flex your muscles here. I want to start first with day 2, either the second round or the third round, a prospect you'd most like the Dolphins to select with either of those 2 picks.
Well, speaking of the secondary and how much need that they have for the secondary, I like Isaiah Johnson, the corner out of Houston. And I think that this is a guy that's a lengthy corner that has genuine speed and good hips, but he's also whereas Greedy Williams is not going to help you much in the run game and support tackling. I think Isaiah Johnson has a different sort of attitude and will come up and hit you and be really, really physical. I'm not saying he's better than Greedy Williams. He is a wide receiver convert. And so it's going to take him a little bit of time. But again, if you don't care about 2019 as much, hitting a theme, then you're going to allow him to develop. I think that would be a fantastic pick for the Dolphins somewhere in day 2 that would give them a man coverage corner opposite Xavier Howard to groom, develop, and certainly, they did sign the guy from New England that has the groin injuries, but you don't know how much that you're going to get out of him. So yeah, that's one day 2 guy that I would just absolutely love to see. But if you're stuck on the pass rushers, then I'll give you 2. One of them, LJ Collier of TCU, is a Trey Flowers clone. This is a guy that if you watch him on tape and watch him play against offensive tackles, I watched a couple of games of his, and I was noticing something strange, so I went ahead and tallied it up. It was 6 times that he actually just straight up punched an offensive tackle to the ground. It wasn't that the tackle tripped on somebody or got in some awkward position. He just knocked his ass out, and that's what LJ Collier gives you. He's got those heavy hands. He's a very powerful pass rusher. He's got different pass rush moves. He can pass rush inside, outside. Really productive guy at TCU. He went to the Senior Bowl, and Pro Football Focus had him with the highest pass rush win rate of anybody at the Senior Bowl. And during the game itself, he forced a fumble out of Jarrett Stidham, which admittedly isn't that hard to do because he's terrible under pressure. But yeah, he did well in the practices and the game. The only time I've even seen him kind of look, meh or average was when he faced West Virginia offensive tackle Yadni Kajust. And that's another guy that Miami ought to think about, and one that Miami has thought about and has brought in, I believe, for one of their 30 visits. Yadni Kajust is a very talented left tackle from West Virginia. Again, the only guy that I saw, go toe-to-toe with LJ Collier, and somebody that you could certainly look at as being helpful to you staffing that offensive line. I've mentioned before, Chuma Edoga of USC might be one of the most effective tackles that I've seen, period, of anybody. The way the guy moves and the way the guy play is unfair, I think, for a mid-round pick, for a day 2 pick. The only reason he's there is because he's got a poor attitude. He's a very smart player. Scored a very high Wonderlic. But, evidently he's had a poor attitude at times. And you could question whether Miami's going to touch something like that in the stage that they're in, but he's still really fantastic. So, I'd be tempted anyway. Those are some of the guys that I would think about. Another one, I'll just finish one last one. If you want the big boys on the interior of the defensive line, I like Kalen Saunders of Western Illinois. He is a big, 320-pound type guy. He came to the Senior Bowl, really wowed everybody, beat a lot of people. He has that unusual athletic ability. He can do backflips and stuff like that. Also, super high Wonderlic score, like in the 30s. He's a very smart player, a very good character, high character guy. And watch him up, I mentioned Easton Stick, the quarterback in North Dakota State, as one of the guys I like. Watch his game, Kalen Saunders' game against Easton Stick. North Dakota State, for all that I like Easton Stick, his team was built to absolutely dominate the FCS. They win championships every year. It's like the Patriots of the FCS, basically. And it starts with that offensive line in North Dakota State in the running game. And Kalen Saunders absolutely abused that offensive line the way that, and he did it sometimes from like outside linebacker. He's like a 330-pound guy, and they were using him as an outside linebacker pass rusher in the game. And he was putting moves on guys and just like dusting them like he's Brian Burns. It was really unique to watch. The game that he had, the ability that he had, the Senior Bowl that he had, everything keeps checking, positive for Kalen Saunders. I'm wondering why he's not, first, second round pick type guy, but he keeps being put in the third round or maybe even the fourth round. I see him as a solid day two. You're going to be really happy with him. I've probably gone through more than enough players for day two, though.
And we very much appreciate that.
We'll get back to our episode here in a second, but first, we've had a lot of inquiries about how you can contribute to the 5 Reasons Sports Network other than just giving us money, which we'll certainly take, or being a podcaster, and I have too many bad ones already. So here's an idea if you want to get involved with us, and it goes beyond our new website, 5reasonsports.com. We are looking for sales representatives. Why? Because we have a lot to sell. We sell ads on our podcasts. We sell ads on social media. We also are selling sponsorships and banner ads on our website. So we got a ton of inventory to sell. We are credentialed with all 5 teams down here. We're fully established, and we just want somebody who can go out into the community and sell that product, sell Miami sports by Miami for Miami to the South Florida community. So if you want to get involved, here's 2 ways that you can contact us. One is by going to Skolnick at 5reasonsports.com, and the other way is going to Jorge, Jorge, at 5reasonsports.com. Reach out one of those 2 ways, and we will get back in touch with you and tell you how you can help and how you can make money.
I actually want to close with something different. I wanted to ask about a day 3 pick, and maybe we can get one before we go. But I wanted to ask about this idea that you've mentioned a few times. That's kind of the opportunity cost that maybe not going for wins in 2019 presents itself. So if you were sort of advising the Dolphins on what they could do with this opportunity, if they are indeed, and I think this is coming from ownership level, so I think the owner, Stephen Ross, is sold on Tua as a quarterback that can legitimately change his franchise, and frankly, I think that's a really good idea, but it's going to take a lot in order to achieve that. So do you think that the opportunity for the Dolphins of not carrying a 2019 is, like you said, with the first-round idea of Jeffrey? Forgive me, I forget his name off the top of my head. Jeffrey Simmons, yeah. So taking a player who is not going to play in 2019 and has maybe top 5 pick potential, what kind of things would you then be targeting after that? Is it more about maybe having a player that's excellent at one thing, but scouts have picked him apart because he's really deficient in another area, and your goal is to, over the course of that first year, build him up? What kind of opportunities do you think could present themselves by virtue of this strategy that they may or may not be pursuing?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples, and we'll go with linebackers. We'll move to linebacker. I think that Miami's looking for sort of two-way linebackers, and their version of two-way is not necessarily run stop and pass coverage. Their version of two-way for a linebacker is pass rush and run stop. So if you're looking at a guy like Emeka Egbele of Houston, is a player that's been moved around in that Houston defense, and he's played overhang positions where, honestly, I hate that position. They put them so far out wide, defending wide receiver screens and such, that they don't get a chance to really shine and do very well as players. And what you look at for him is, because of that, because he's been used in these different positions, he hasn't been given the opportunity to shine the way that he could. And he's also kind of raw, and he's also, you're going to have to polish him up. Another guy that's like that is Caden Ellis. He's a guy that Miami's paying very close attention to. He actually is Luther Ellis's son. I don't know if you remember Luther Ellis. He was a Pro Bowl defensive tackle for the Detroit Lions. I don't think even Luther Ellis knew how talented Caden Ellis is, but in his defense, I think he had something like 12 kids. So Caden Ellis has been a linebacker for that defense of theirs and I think that he's been used the wrong way. He's been used more as like a classic. He's 6'3", 245 pounds, something along those lines. He's been used as sort of more of a classic linebacker, sometimes an overhang defender, playing a little bit too far out wide, like a Sam linebacker, something like that. You put his hand down and get him in pass rush. He has great his agility drills are probably the best I've ever seen at that size. He has great agility. He has great hip snap and flexibility on him. The flexibility on this guy as a pass rusher, if you put him down into a pass rush position more often, you might be shocked just how good he is. And so would his own father, I think, who was the defensive line coach for his team. I think that that's one of the guys. And by the way, that team, I think he was an Idaho Vandal. And so I think that that's sort of the opportunity you're looking for, is guys that were misused, maybe a little bit misunderstood in college, that you're going to look at a different. I'll give you another linebacker out of Oregon, Justin Hollins, who is a pass rusher linebacker, a lot like Deion Jordan was, which, bad name, right? But if you're talking about day 3, right, you're not talking about number 3 overall. You're not talking about first round pick. You can take chances on these conversions, on these, hey, this guy was misunderstood or miscast or, not thought of the right way. And we're going to play him a different way. And we're going to get that conversion and we're going to collect on it. That's what I would probably be thinking if I were in the day 3 and the Miami Dolphins. And I don't care so much about 2019. I know I'm going to be making tough conversions for some of these players, but it might pay dividends down the road. The other thing I'd be thinking is, hey, this is pretty deep offensive line group, and I'd continue to get some offensive linemen in day 3, like Nick Allegretti of Illinois, who can play center and guard. Scored the highest Wonderlic, I think, of anybody in the draft. And Josh Miles of Morgan State is another guy I saw live at Shrine practices myself. I mean, this guy moves well. He's a fantastic guard prospect. Keep pounding those guys as well, the offensive line bodies, and get them under Pat Flaherty and let him coach them up. But go for some of those conversions. Really take some gambles.
All right, so I've got 2 questions. Try to answer these in 30 seconds or less. All right, we're going to put you to the test here. No big words. All syllables must be 2 or fewer. Okay.
To be honest with you, I'm still glowing off of fantastic guard prospect. I mean, that's why CK's here. That's why CK previews the draft for us, because he has thoughts on fantastic guard prospects. Carry on.
Right, but I'm gonna let him boast a little bit here on a couple of things. All right, but 30 seconds or less. Why did you like Pat Mahomes so much in college, and did you think he'd be this good?
Yeah, I had him as a number 1 pick for about 2 years before he was drafted. He had the ability to be this good because he can throw the football any way he wants, anywhere he wants. And I look for guys that make the game look easy. I don't want to make it more complicated than that, but he makes the game look easy. In his last year there, I think his third down conversions when he was throwing the ball or running the ball was something like insane, like over 60%. Which is, you just don't see that. He's a guy that can throw it anywhere from anywhere, any way you want it, and be really, really accurate. And that kind of throwing talent, that kind of throwing ability, and the way that he thinks, especially since he had that athletic performance to him, that sort of point guardish, feel to him, where he's quicker than the game. And that's what I saw in him. That's what I loved about him. Yeah, I had him as a number 1 overall pick. I'd been boasting about him for well over 2 years before he was drafted. There's a special place in my heart for him.
All right, that's more than 30 seconds.
I can't even imagine how satisfying it must be watching him be the best quarterback in the league for a year when you're on Pat Mahomes' corner to that degree. That just has to be as good as it gets as a football analyst.
Well, that and the fact that he's not on the Dolphins though. Well, when is it going to be their turn?
Maybe in 2020, which I think is kind of the genesis of what we'll be talking about. All right, CK, find him, of course, on 3 yards per carry in the 5 Reasons Sports Network with Alfredo Artiaga and Simon Clancy. Subscribe Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Find all the information at 5reasonsports.com. Check him out on Twitter at CK Parrott as well. We'll be tweeting about a bunch of stuff throughout the draft as well. I believe 3 yards per carry will be doing a day 2 or a day 3 podcast, and of course a podcast recapping it all after its conclusion. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the 5 Reasons Podcast.
thank you for listening to the 5 Reasons podcast. Thank you so much.